The ask and receive system Jesus taught for centuries. People have prayed, asked, pleaded, and hoped, yet very few have understood why some requests seem to move heaven itself, while others disappear into silence. In the first 30 seconds of this message, you need to understand something that was never hidden, yet rarely practiced. Jesus never taught people what to ask for. He taught them how to ask, and that distinction changes everything. When Jesus spoke about asking and receiving, he wasn't offering comfort words or religious poetry. He was revealing a precise inner posture, a way of approaching reality that aligns the human will with divine order. Most people fail not because they lack faith, but because they ask from effort, fear, and urgency. Jesus taught asking from rest, certainty, and alignment. This chapter begins where tradition always began, with understanding, not technique. When Jesus said, "Ask, and it shall be given to you," he was not encouraging repetition or emotional force. He was describing a state of consciousness. In ancient times, asking was not begging. It was claiming what already belonged to you under divine law. The modern mind has inverted this teaching, turning prayer into negotiation. Jesus never negotiated. He spoke as one who knew the order of things. To ask like Jesus is to speak from the end, from fulfillment, not from luck. That is why he could give thanks before the miracle appeared, why he could rest while others panicked. This system works because it follows how reality was always structured. Nothing is forced. Nothing is chased. When you ask correctly, receiving is no longer a future event. It becomes inevitable. Before moving forward, let this settle. The system Jesus taught does not respond to desperation. It responds to alignment. And alignment begins when the question inside you changes from "will this happen?" to "how could it not?" This is the foundation. Without it, everything else becomes noise. Why most people ask the wrong way to understand why so many people fail to receive. You must look honestly at how they ask. Most asking today is driven by urgency, fear of loss, or the belief that something is missing. That alone places the mind in opposition to the very law Jesus taught. When you ask from lack, you affirm lack. Jesus never asked that way. He never pleaded, never rushed, never explained himself. He spoke with quiet authority because he understood that asking was not an attempt to convince God, but an act of alignment with what already existed in divine order. The ancient world understood this. Words were not emotional expressions. They were declarations. When Jesus said, "Whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it," he was pointing to a sequence that modern teachings often ignore. Belief does not follow the request. It precedes. Italiano. If belief comes after asking, the request collapses under doubt. That is why repetition without understanding produces exhaustion instead of results. Jesus taught a way of asking that felt complete the moment it was spoken. This is why he could withdraw, rest, or sleep after speaking. The work was already done internally. People today often confuse intensity with faith. They raise their voice, multiply their words, and call it devotion. But intensity is often fear in disguise. Jesus' way was quiet, grounded, and precise. He asked answer from certainty, and then allowed reality to reorganize itself. When you understand this, prayer stops being effort and becomes position. You are no longer reaching upward. You are standing within alignment. This chapter exists to dismantle the false idea that asking more equals receiving faster. In the system Jesus taught, clarity outranks volume, and rest outranks repetition. When you ask like this, there is nothing left to prove, and nothing left to chase. The receiving has already begun. Asking from the end, not from the beginning. One of the most misunderstood elements of the system Jesus taught is the idea of asking from the end. This alone separates traditional prayer from effective alignment. Most people ask while mentally standing at the beginning of a problem. They are aware of the absence, the delay, the conflict, the lack. Their request rises out of a condition they are still emotionally living in. Jesus never did this. He always spoke from the completed state. When he gave thanks before the bread multiplied, when he spoke life before Lazarus moved, he was not pretending. He was positioning himself in the end result before the outer world caught up. To ask from the end means your inner conversation has already shifted. You are no longer describing what you want to escape. You are acknowledging what is already resolved. This is not imagination used as fantasy. It is imagination used as alignment. The reason this works is simple and ancient. Reality follows consciousness, not effort. Jesus understood that the visible world is always responding, always rearranging, but it can only reflect what is held as true internally. Asking from the end collapses time because it removes contradiction. When there is no inner argument, there is nothing for reality. This is why Jesus could say, "Your faith has made you whole," not, "It will make you whole." The asking was already complete. Most people struggle here because the ego wants evidence before rest. But the system Jesus taught requires rest before evidence. When you ask correctly, there is a quiet finality to it. There is no urge to check, repeat, or explain. You simply know the request has been received. This chapter is important because it restores the correct order. Inner acceptance first, outer confirmation later. If you reverse that order, frustration grows. If you follow it, peace arrives immediately, and results follow naturally. Asking from the end is not forcing belief. It is remembering how asking was always meant to feel say told. Complete and unquestioned. The role of rest after asking. Rest is not a reward that comes after receiving. In the system Jesus taught, rest is the evidence that asking was done correctly. This is where many people unknowingly undo their own requests. They ask, then worry. They speak, then analyze. They pray, then monitor circumstances. Each of these actions pulls the mind back into effort, signaling that the request was never fully accepted internally. Jesus rested because there was nothing left to do. When he withdrew alone, slept during storms, or walked away after speaking a word, he was demonstrating trust in the law itself. Rest is not passivity, it is confidence. When you truly ask the way Jesus taught, rest follows naturally. There is no tension, no urgency, no mental rehearsal. The inner state is quiet. This quiet is not emptiness. It is fullness. Rest tells reality that alignment has occurred, and reality responds to that signal without resistance. Most traditions have inverted this, teaching people to remain alert, vigilant, and emotionally charged. But Jesus consistently modeled withdrawal, silence, and stillness after decisive moments. This was not weakness. It was mastery. Rest allows the subconscious to accept a new assumption without interference. It allows the inner word to take root. When you rest, you are no longer questioning whether it will work. You are allowing it to work. This chapter matters because it removes the final obstacle. Interference. The system does not require constant attention. It requires trust in the order Jesus revealed. Once the request is aligned, rest is not optional. It is to seal. When rest is present, receiving is already underway, even if the outer world has not yet reflected it. In the system, peace is not the result. Peace is the confirmation that the system has been activated. Why certainty matters more than faith. Many people believe that faith is the engine behind asking and receiving, but Jesus consistently revealed something deeper: certainty. Faith, as it is commonly taught, often contains struggle. It hopes, it tries, it fluctuates. Certainty does not. Certainty is calm, grounded, and unmoved by appearances. When Jesus spoke, he was not hoping for alignment. He was certain of it. This is why his words carried weight without emotional force. The system he taught does not respond to emotional intensity. It responds to inner conviction. Certainty is not created by repeating words or convincing yourself harder. It is formed when there is no inner contradiction. When you ask in a way that feels final, reality has nothing to resist. Most people weaken their asking because they secretly doubt the outcome while speaking the words. Jesus addressed this directly when he said that a divided mind should not expect to receive. Division is the real obstacle, not lack of effort. Certainty feels quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not seek reassurance. It is the natural state that follows correct asking. This is why Jesus could speak briefly and walk away. He was not abandoning the request. He was demonstrating certainty. In T system, certainty replaces struggle. You no longer need to keep believing because belief has stabilized into knowing. This chapter matters because it shifts responsibility inward, where it always belonged. You are not trying to change God's mind or convince reality. You are removing internal resistance. When certainty is present, time becomes irrelevant. Receiving does not feel delayed because the inner state has already changed. The outer world simply follows. Understanding this frees you from emotional cycles of hope and disappointment. You stop measuring progress by signs and begin trusting alignment. Certainty is the natural outcome of asking the right way. And when certainty is present, receiving is no longer a question, it is a process already in motion. Living the ask and receive system daily. The system Jesus taught was never meant to be used only in moments of crisis. It was designed as a way of living. Asking correctly is not a ritual. It is a posture you carry into every decision, every conversation, every desire. When this system becomes habitual, life stops feeling reactive. You are no longer responding emotionally to circumstances. You are positioning yourself internally before they arise. This is what it means to live from alignment instead of effort. Jesus lived this way consistently. He did not separate prayer from daily life. His words, actions, and silences all came from the same inner certainty. To live this system daily means you no longer wait for permission, signs, or perfect conditions. You ask inwardly from the end, rest, and move forward without tension. Over time, this rewires how you interpret events. Delays no longer feel like denial. Silence no longer feels like absence. Everything becomes part of a larger rearrangement. This chapter completes the teaching by grounding it in practicality. The ask and receive system is subtle, but it is stable. It does not depend on mood, environment, or external validation. Once understood, it simplifies life. You stop chasing outcomes and start expecting alignment. You stop explaining yourself to the world and start trusting the order Jesus revealed. Living this way does not make life perfect, but it makes it coherent. There is less inner noise, less urgency, and less fear. And in that quiet, receiving becomes natural. This is not a technique to use once and abandon. It is a return to how things were always meant to function. When you ask like this, you are no longer hoping life will respond. You are allowing it to. Living the ask and receive system daily, living the ask and receive system Jesus taught is not about isolating moments of prayer. It is about restoring a constant inner alignment that governs how you move through life. When this system becomes natural, you no longer react first and pray later. You begin inwardly positioned before circumstances appear. This is why Jesus seemed untouched by urgency. He was never rushing reality, because he understood that reality was already responding. To live this way daily means your inner dialogue changes. You stop asking questions rooted in fear and start affirming conclusions rooted in certainty. Over time, this becomes effortless. You no longer feel the need to justify outcomes or explain delays. You understand that asking is complete the moment alignment is reached. This daily posture creates coherence between thought, feeling, and expectation. Life no longer feels fragmented. Even challenges lose their emotional charge because you are no longer identifying with beginnings, but with outcomes. Jesus lived in this awareness continuously, and that is why his words carried authority without force. When you adopt this system as a lifestyle, you stop negotiating with life. You stop waiting for permission to feel at peace. Peace becomes the signal that alignment is active. And from that place, receiving becomes normal, not miraculous. This is not about controlling outcomes. It is about releasing resistance. The system Jesus taught does not demand constant attention, it demands trust. When trust stabilizes, life reorganizes quietly. This is how asking and receiving were always meant to work. If this teaching resonates, engage with it actively. Reflect on how you ask, not what you ask for. Share your insight in the comments. Subscribe for deeper teachings, and allow this understanding to settle before seeking the next answer.